The education dilemma. States around the country are reporting a significant decline in the number of students enrolled in public school because of the pandemic, leaving experts and educators concerned about this growing trend. We're in depth in this half hour with a national education expert and the Deputy Commissioner of Minnesota's Education Department, breaking the situation down. Schools across the country are facing incredible challenges amidst this pandemic. The Washington Post just published an article about districts having to track down students who had just stopped showing up to school or who had failed to appear for online learning as the new school year started just this past fall. Here in Minnesota, we've been talking about how public school enrollment has dropped by about 17,000 students as families have been turning to homeschooling, private schooling, and delayed entry into kindergarten because of everything that has happened in the past year. And then this article put out by Forbes this week. Writer Jeanne Allen, who is also the founder of the Center for Education Reform in Washington, D.C., writes about the growing issues with education in this country. I am thrilled that Jeanne Allen is able to join us today to go in depth about this. And Jeanne, the things that are happening all across the country are certainly not, just here in Minnesota as we're having problems, but we report on the Minnesota issues. But what is it that you're finding? And in your article, you wrote about unions and how unions have been kind of tying the hands of is it lawmakers or school districts?
Yeah, Betsy, people are asking what exactly is the holdup. Initially, everybody thought it was about safety and security and making sure there couldn't be a spread, even though we've been hearing for a long time the CDC say it's okay. And the holdup really does come down to one simple equation: adults and special interests. Look, all those people, by the way, adult special interests, whether they're leaders in districts who just don't know how to push back, whether it's teachers unions, or whether it's just kind of, not courageous policymakers or governors, they're all well-meaning. They all want right. But they've all been scared by a false narrative that students going to school is going to create more spread and make teachers, parents, and students unsafe. And yet, in the states and the communities where schools have been open since September, if not before, we've not seen that. And so it really does come down to Minnesota's experience is not unlike a majority of states. There's a bunch of folks in charge or who think they're in charge that are telling families and teachers not to show up.
So the special interest groups, as you've touched on, is one aspect, but this has become so incredibly politicized. And because of that, unfortunately, our students are the ones who are losing out. Speak more to that.
Yeah, and I suspect that number, about 17,000 students that are no longer enrolled in Minnesota, is much, much bigger. Usually school districts don't report for a few months. This is not real-time reporting. That's probably a number from the fall we're seeing across the country. So let's look at the big picture here. Right now, across the country, average proficiency rate of kids in fourth grade is fewer than 35% in reading and math. That's average. That's, if you look at the numbers for minority and low-income kids, it usually hovers around 20%. That means that on an average day, our kids are less than two-thirds likely to do math, reading, civics, social studies, etc. At grade level. Enter a crisis where they're not only not showing up for school, those that are in remote, and obviously everyone who's not in school is remote, the remote education, we have learned that our education system has not taken kindly to innovation. What teachers are struggling through is basically crisis education. They've not been given the tools, they were not given the training, and they certainly don't have the resources in many cases. What allows kids to learn is being in an environment, and again, that could be a great virtual environment too, but being in an environment where people are pushing them and there's expectations and there's interest and there are adults helping them through it. And so we know that their mental health is declining. We're hearing that more and more from social scientists, and we have yet to see the bump that's going to happen from there. There's just no excuse. There's no reason for us not to be giving parents the money. They can go find what needs to happen for their kids if the systems won't.
Jeannie, if I can get you to hang on 2 minutes, I need to come back. I need to take a quick break. And when we come back, I'd like to talk to you real quick about the parents and the teachers and how it's so important for them to work together. But now this pandemic has seemed to pit them against each other. So give me just 2 minutes and we'll come back and talk about that. I'm continuing my conversation now with Jeanne Allen, who is the founder of the Center for Education Reform. It's a national organization. And Jeanne, as we were talking about the politics of what's been happening in our education system over the last year, I've done a lot of interviews, and parents and teachers work together for their kids' education in the best interest of their children. But this has now become something where it's one versus the other. They're fighting each other. We've got our own parents here in our district in Rochester, Minnesota, protesting, saying, put our kids back in school. And then we've got unions pushing back. This is happening, though, across the country.
It is happening across the country. Just this week in Montgomery County, Maryland, teachers, about 1,000, got in their cars and did drive-by protests. In Washington, D.C., the union said, if you make us go back, we'll just leave. Philadelphia, they're sitting at a bargaining table saying that they may not even be back by summer. And the head of the American Federation of Teachers, one of the two national unions, Randy Weingarten, keeps telling everyone from the New York Times to, Sunday morning news programs that they really want kids to go back. They really want to open up. They just want to make sure their safety, and that somehow she has nothing to do with this. Teachers' unions were created for a very noble goal, just like many unions, to help support, nurture, bring about professional development, and defend teachers. Right now, they are responsible, particularly the AFT and the NEA, for sending such bad information to their teachers that teachers feel unsafe. And yet everywhere there are teachers who are showing up at school, by the way, my husband's one of them, they're fine. And it's not that they're just fine. They're fine when the precautions that the CDC recommended in the summer are taken.
What can parents do to get their kids back in school besides these protests, they're being heard, but it's not necessarily changing anything. And do they reach out to your organization? Because you have a lot of influence there in Washington, D.C. And then on the other side of that, for teachers, you say they've gotten bad information from their unions, but a lot of these students are also, there's a lot of them in some of these public schools, and trying to keep them distanced is next to impossible, they say.
It is very hard to keep them distanced. However, if you have control over your school, it's not. And so schools that already have a tremendous amount of effectiveness, who are disciplined, who get results, schools get results, one of the really interesting things about this, I guess it's not so interesting, it's actually a shame, is what we're seeing in the deficiencies and the challenges with schools is actually exacerbated by COVID. But schools that were effective before are still effective. Schools that are ineffective at actually organizing themselves, that are overly bureaucratic, that don't deliver, are worse off. And so this just actually underscores the importance of parents and teachers having the freedom and flexibility to educate their kids or to educate the students assigned to them in wholly creative ways. And so what can both of them do, parents and teachers, because sometimes they're one and the same? First and foremost, ask your governors, state legislators, and congressmen, where's the money? $68 billion allocated for education so far, of which $4 billion has been spent. In your state, I don't know the numbers offhand, but they're very available. And so just because the money's been appropriated, it's not been spent for the reopening measures that were intended. That's number one. Number two, simultaneously, that money should go to fund the families that are already educating their kids or want to educate their students in schools that are open. And we should be saying, fund the families. This is nonsense. If I'm paying for a tutor, if I want to enroll in a private school that's open, if I want to take my kid to another district that might be open, if I want to create a micro school or a pod, let me spend that money. Federal money can absolutely bypass districts and go to parents. That's number two. Number three, let your school board members know, and your governor and your state policymakers, if this continues, you're fired. Next time I show up at a ballot box, I have the power. And parents have created most of the reforms that have ever made a difference in this country or have contributed to them, whether it's the charter school movement in Minnesota, which parents and teachers helped create, or post-secondary enrollment options, or common sense standards, or teacher professionalism, or curriculum changes, real reading. Parents have driven that, and so they have power and they can make a difference. They can absolutely write us at edreform.com, and we'll help direct them to other people like themselves. But Facebook and Twitter are a buzz with parents who are bonding together and banding together to challenge the establishment, and that needs to happen now more than ever.
The organization is called Center for Education Reform. Jeanne Allen, we're going to put a link to that with this interview on our website. I so appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.